welcome to That Implementation Science Podcast, the show that aims to reduce the innovation to implementation gap to 16 and a half years. Today is the first of two episodes where Kevin and King and I conduct short interviews with several early career researchers at last year's ABCT convention in Seattle. On this episode, we first interview Mallory Dobias, whose work focuses on improving teen access to mental health supports using digital technologies and empowering young people in interventions. Secondly, we'll interview Andrea Ng, who will describe her work on a measurement feedback system for school therapists. One thing you'll notice is the sound quality is not as good as usual, and in particular, you'll hear the appearance and disappearance of rhythmic knocking. We never figured out what this sound was, but it's probably the Grim Reaper, coming for these researchers' careers as a consequence of appearing on our show. Let's get started.
My name is Mallory Dobias. I am a psychology PhD candidate at Stony Brook University, and I also do research at APA Health, which is a teen mentorship company based out of California.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your work at Stony Brook.
Yeah, I'd love to, and thanks for having me. So my work, I primarily study how to improve teens' access to mental health supports. And that often looks like using digital type resources to reach teens who may not otherwise receive mental health support. In the past, I've focused specifically on teens who may have a history of self-harm or experiencing suicidal thoughts, how to get supports to them quickly.
What are some of the big barriers for teens accessing mental health?
Lots of different things, like cost of services. It tends to be really high, and so a lot of teens aren't able to access services if their family can't afford it. But another big one that we're finding in a lot of the qualitative research that my lab and other collaborators' labs have done is parents and caregivers, actually. So a lot of teens, it's kind of an issue of if I have to involve my parents or caregivers at all, I probably won't do it. And so we've seen that pretty consistently in both quantitative and qualitative work.
Yeah, I imagine there's a phase, there's an age at which parents stop bringing their kids to mental health services and the youth starts seeking it out themselves. Probably in the teen years, I'd guess. I know that with younger kids, I don't know if this research has been replicated, and it was many years ago this came out, but the best predictor of whether or not a kid got mental health services wasn't their mental health functioning, but was the caregiver's level of strain. So caregivers who got really stressed out brought their kids into mental health services. I wonder what are some of the major predictors as you get into that older group that decides whether or not a teen brings themselves in for mental health services or asks their parent to go, to bring them or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's really important question. I think I can't emphasize enough cost being a big thing. So if family has the means or the insurance coverage to be able to take their kid in to get traditional mental health services, that's one way of kind of making it more likely that they'll actually access care. In terms of predicting which teens are actually able to access supports on their own, there's just not a lot of supports that teens can access on their own without parent permission or at least facilitation. So that's kind of an emerging area of work that I really want more to be done in. And specifically, the lab that I work in does a lot of self-administered programs. So as we kind of do more and more of that work, I'd love to see, who tends to sign up for these programs and who doesn't. And I'm thinking of specifically things like demographics. A lot of the teens in the studies that we have run tend to be LGBTQ plus queer teens. They tend to be transgender, gender diverse, or girls or young women. So that could be some indication that there's more demand or openness. It could be that the supports we're developing aren't reaching as many cis boys and men. But those are just some initial thoughts I have about who's accessing self-administered supports.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the self-administered supports? What do they look like?
That's a good question. So they can look like a lot of different things. I think there's no right or wrong way to do it. But our lab really focuses on kind of a balance of careful framing, psychoeducation, and then really targeted brief exercises that allow the team to take whatever it is that we are learning and apply it to their life. From the get-go, we kind of frame the experience as a way for the team to teach us something. So they're the experts on what they're experiencing. And then they get to go through whatever self-administered activity, share about their life, learn what other teens like them have experienced, learn from experts in the field about what mental health is. And then at the end, we ask them, what would you share with someone who's actually experiencing something similar to you? How would you take what you just learned and help us communicate that to other teens? So that tends to be in a really brief package, the types of things that we roll out. And they teach pretty core evidence-based skills. So things like behavioral activation, of like doing something that aligns with your values, or the idea that like you are capable of growth and change. You can make changes that help change how you feel over time. And so a core idea or a core activity is embedded in a really brief experience that's self-administered.
Yeah, it sounds like, are you distinguishing the term self-administered from self-help? Because what I'm hearing, the self-administered is still guided largely by their experience with the thing that you have, perhaps. I don't know, or maybe there's no distinction there.
I should probably think harder about that. I think that I tend to use them interchangeably in terms of when I'm talking about these programs, but there is an element of some of the programs where we actually ask teens for their permission to share what they have shared with us with other teens. And so there is some element of like, they can see what other teens have said. It's not entirely just themselves, because there's this community of folks who have been through the programs before, but it's not real time. So very much self-help, self-administered in nature.
When you think about these programs and you think about active ingredients, I have two questions on that front. What do you think are the sort of effective things you're delivering that work to help kids make change? Let me ask that first, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So I think first and foremost, teens don't often get to be the experts. So I think it's pretty empowering for them to be able to like teach us something and to talk about their own mental health using their own words. I also think the ability to share with another person, we believe that helps like embed that skill a little bit more. That helps them like deepen their learning. And it also empowers them to, again, spread kind of what they're taking in.
So when you say share with another person, that's like the thing at the end where they say, what would you say to somebody else?
What would you say to someone else? And then we ask for their permission to share it.
Of course.
So that, I would say, that's another core component that we consider to be active. And then we try to, throughout, share testimonials from other teens so that we believe destigmatizes any of the issues that they're dealing with. For example, one of the programs that I tested in a study, and a lot of the programs actually, reduce self-hate. And when you look at qualitative feedback of the programs, some of the teens mentioned like, it's good to know that other teens are experiencing stuff like this. And I would have trouble talking about this with someone else. So maybe the self-help format is a really approachable kind of first step for people who might not be comfortable sharing with someone else just yet.
Yeah. And so on active ingredients, what do you think are missing from these programs that could make them more effective? Or when you compare them to more intensive treatment, not that I'm saying these programs are insufficient, but right, they're one step and one broad swath or broadband approach. So like, what do you think could be added to these programs to boost them? Whether it was like keep them in the same format that they are, that they're self-help, self-delivered, or like if you're like could add coaching or add like follow-ups or add practice and feedback elements. Like what are the things that you think, even not even just like where you would go with research, I'm just sort of imagining like bridging the gap between the sort of the online or this sort of single session self-help intervention versus one-on-one sort of therapy, imagining that that's like the full service kind of thing.
Sure.
Like what are some steps in between those that you could envision adding?
I think that's a great question. I am I'm entirely biased on this, but I'm a really big fan of like a lot of the work that is kind of the refocus on lay provider stuff, mentorship, community-based intervention and support. I like that teens can share that piece of what they've learned, and I think creative interventions that I've enjoyed do implement a piece that's like, hey, we're growing as a network of young people. Like here, you're not alone in whatever mental health journey that you're having, and so maybe it doesn't look like formal long-term coaching, but some other elements, bringing in the pieces that teens say they really like, some piece of connection to other teens maybe. But we'd have to think creatively about how to do that, of course. Another piece that's almost the flip of the question you asked me.
Sure.
I mentioned several times that like open-ended kind of free response activities. Those are, we believe, pretty key to learning, but we haven't tested that formally. Like we haven't compared an intervention where we don't have those written pieces versus ones that do. And we also know that there's big dropouts on pages where we ask people to write a lot.
Yeah.
So we're still trying to figure out how to balance that like deep learning and like working on writing out enough to kind of build that skill and have a good experience with it versus someone who may or may not be able to finish it or see the page and say, forget this, I'm not going to write anything.
Every time I take a survey and somebody wants my qualitative feedback, I'm just like, skip.
Exactly.
Unless I actually literally, somebody sent me a survey on methods, practices, and I opened it and it was a bunch of qualitative questions, and I just emailed the researcher because I knew them and I said, can we just do a video chat? I will just tell you what I think. I do not want to sit down and type out my thoughts.
Right.
I just it was so aversive to me. Yeah. So I get it. I get I empathize with your dropout folks. And if you want to share that with them, that other people hate providing qualitative information, if that would help your teams, I would be thrilled.
But you're not alone.
You're not alone.
Yeah. It sounds like what you're saying is that though they hate it, they don't want to do it, you feel like it's an active element and need to try to do that in some way that's engaging, other things like that. Have you all tried to do it, bring in sort of any kind of AI responses, or you mentioned the social norms, but the social validation by having seeing what other people responded and wrote as being a way of eliminating some stigma, that sort of thing, but building connections.
Yeah, I think we do provide some examples, but I think maybe we could do, as long as it's brief, we have to be very mindful of every single piece of text we put into something like this. Providing an example might help folks engage with it a little easier, lower the barrier to writing something down. I'd be curious to compare directly like multiple choice responses to a question, including an other box, you know what I mean? And see if folks...
Yeah, is writing even doing anything at all, or is it just the process of thinking about it?
Correct.
And maybe you can achieve that in a little different way.
Yeah. And so I think we won't know until we directly compare. I think my instinct is, the writing is so important, but...
Yeah. I guess there's some research, and I have not read this research. I've heard this third hand, but something about veterans typing out a letter versus handwriting a letter, and the handwriting had much more powerful effects than the typing. That is one of those things that I want to see replicated because I'm kind of not sure if there's any actual impact.
Yeah, there's a whole if I could say, a genre of research on whether taking notes by hand or on the laptop is better. There was a really splashy article that changed how I'm sure dozens, if not hundreds, of college instructors changed their laptop policies because it randomized people to taking notes longhand versus on the computer. And it came out in Psych Science, I think, and it was made a huge splash. And it suggested that taking notes longhand improved long-term memory and retention, and just it was better on all counts. And then, of course, you look that up 5-10 years later, and there's been a whole series of replications and failed replications and people fighting back and forth about whether laptops in the classroom are actually good or not. And then, of course, people with disabilities come in and say, hey, look, writing longhand's not actually working for me. I have to have a computer and take notes. And it's a whole mess. So my guess is we don't know. But it'd be great. It would be a great thing to test about whether, and maybe with writing it out versus multiple choice or something is a trade-off, because you get more people to do the multiple choice, but then you get a smaller effect, but you get more people with the effect, and how do you think that through? Well, we're talking a lot about what you have done. Tell us about what you're doing now, sort of thinking forward, because you're doing not just this single session intervention stuff, right?
Yeah. I'm doing that. I'm actually presenting tomorrow some qualitative research where we asked teens who have gone through a digital mental health intervention trial what their ideal mental health support would look like. And we look at 5 different characteristics: who would be involved, where it would take place, whether it would be anonymous, what other people know about it, who would decide it was working, and finally how it would make them feel. It's been a really exciting kind of foray into qualitative research. For me, I've done a couple of things, but this is one of my favorites that I've really started on. And I think it's really opened my eyes to even youth who do the digital mental health supports that we offer, and they sign up and they self-refer. They still want access to in-person mental health services, and often with mental health professionals. And so when I say, implementation science needs to open an ecosystem of mental health supports, I think that really demonstrates that we need to improve access across the board. We need to provide teens with more choices. I think being able to choose where and when and how and if you get mental health support is a huge privilege, and more people need more choices. So that's something I'm working on now. Working with APA Health, we're working on project evaluating a teen mentorship program where teens are partnered with a mentor that may share identities and similar lived experience to teens, and they kind of walk them through a 12-week digital mental health curriculum, and they meet with them virtually. And so I'm excited to think creatively about how mental health supports can look for people. And I do believe that there's no one way that's going to reach everyone we need to reach.
Yeah, full disclaimer, I'm working with Mallory on this ABA Health research. Tell me, when you say that we need to think more creatively, if you had access to lots and lots of resources, what sort of full, comprehensive mental health package might you create for youth?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I love the mentorship angle. I'm really stuck with the problem of what to do with teens who say, I want in-person services, I want to meet with someone, and also I would never bring this up to my parent because they're going to laugh at me because they don't believe in mental health because of any number of reasons. And it would require probably some policy level change, but I wish there were a way to get those teens access to some sort of support center where they could connect with someone in person. I don't know what that would look like. Yeah, I'm thinking of even a Minute Clinic style walk-in help system. I think that could be helpful.
Yeah.
So as you know, on the podcast, we do a quiz. Because we're doing short interviews, we have a short quiz, and we're going to do it in the form of a Would You Rather. So this is actually one of Mike's. Mike and I both came up with ones mostly to try to amuse each other, but also to entertain our guests. So would you rather be the 7th author on an article that changes the world and gets immediate worldwide acclaim, or be the first author on an article that changes the world but, in a tragic twist, does not get acclaim until after your death?
Oh boy. I find that I really like doing supportive roles on papers, which is not what you want to hear as an academic. But I love being on a team and working with a team. So the 7th author, I don't know. It depends. I think it depends on the work that I'd be doing. But
so let me follow up then. So is that your choice? You'd rather be, or you're still thinking it through? Tell us. What would you rather be?
I don't know. I don't know. World acclaim is fine. It makes me excited and nervous. But yeah, I think if I could work it with a good team, the 7th author would be fine. It'd be cool to see it help. Yeah.
Now, I just want to be clear. We didn't say it would help. We just said you would get acclaim. So my follow-up to that is, what do you think is appropriate amount of work to do for a 7th author?
I think it depends on the scale of the project. If you're doing a really large-scale project where you're working on this massive data set and you have multiple people doing analyses, you might have someone doing analysis of seventh author. One thing that I really like about what the projects I've tried to do now are like get involved with teams and have a pretty scoped out role, because I learn from people more that way. So I don't know, maybe like definitely touching the data somehow. If it's that big of a project, I would expect that there's like collaboration in terms of sharing and cleaning. And
so yes, maybe a little bit of data analysis, maybe like shaving off p-values so they're significant, trimming who's in the data to make sure you get the finding you want.
Redoing the analysis, get rid of a few cases.
We've all been there.
They're not going to fit well.
Yeah. No shame.
Okay, you know what? I'd like to change my answer.
No, fair enough. Thank you. This was such a fun conversation. Thank you for joining the podcast. We're really excited
for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Mallory.
My name is Andrea Ng, and so I'm originally actually from Malaysia, so I'm an international student, and now I'm currently a fourth-year graduate student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And so I feel like my interest in implementation science kind of started looking at how measurement can be useful, so specifically brief measures that are accessible and like how they can be kind of utilized in public systems of care. And I think as I am advancing in my career, our lab recently kind of launched a new initiative with a really long-time partner, which is the State Department of Education. And we're implementing a measurement feedback system within all of the schools. Specifically, we're trying to essentially understand more, like finding ways to better support the use of evidence-based practices with, like, we call them behavioral health specialists at the school level. So I'm just hoping to kind of just learn more about that and like supporting, like using my research to support that initiative.
Yeah, tell us about that measurement-based care system. What are they measuring? How are they getting the data? Who is it being fed to?
Yeah.
Also, how can you possibly quantify psychological processes and just boil it down to a number? I have to be honest, I'm skeptical of this whole measurement idea.
He's asking what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So, it's still building, but essentially what it is like we take the practice elements approach. So we did this a little bit with the Department of Health already in the community mental health system, and now we're trying to translate that into the Department of Education. But essentially what we're measuring is, I think, right, we're starting with treatment as usual. So we're starting to look at in the schools when these behavioral health specialists have like 30-minute sessions with their youth, their students. What are they focusing on in that session? What are they talking about? And how is that helping them advance their like overall treatment targets, right? But right now there's no data on that, like what exactly the behavioral health specialists are doing. So what we're trying to measure is really, right now treatment as usual, what are they doing? And so right now it's in the form of an app. It's called the Lokahi app. And so we're having behavioral health specialists track these practice elements essentially right now. And then hoping to build off of that, but that's where we're starting.
What are the different practice elements you're tracking with this app?
So it's all, we're using it based off of kind of the practice-wise practice elements. And so it can range, even just like relationship building, exposure, engagement. There's also practice elements that are based on even like a session with a caregiver, so engaging caregivers, kind of varied across different problem areas.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so essentially the provider's sitting in the session with the app either before, after, or even during, and sort of saying, okay, I'm doing a little bit of this, or I'm checking off this, or I'm checking. And you're trying to get a lay of the land about what treatment as usual looks like.
Correct. I think that's where we're starting. We're
Right.
hoping to build more on that and see how we can better support guys, because there's not really much support that they're receiving right now. Like these behavioral health specialists are kind of thrown into their jobs and just being like, here, help these youths.
Yeah.
And, there's only so much I think you can do at the school level right now. And so we're hoping to just help support that a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Very cool.
familiarity with PracticeWise isn't great, but I think there's like 40, probably 50 practice elements, maybe.
More than I can count.
Maybe even more than that. But I imagine one of the challenges you might face is that the context of behavioral health specialists in schools is probably very different, where they're not as often as we'd like sitting down with youth doing therapy, right?
Yes.
Instead, they're like having to rush out to a crisis on the ball field, or they're having to sometimes like do lunch duty, and they didn't want to do that, or whatever, what have you. And so, you're taking those PracticeWise elements. Are you adapting them in any way for this, or are you is that part of this early work to figure out what else needs to be added and changed?
Yes, I think it's the latter. So in our partnerships in the past, it's been a lot of like consultation work. We've done like trainings, and so we've heard kind of all these barriers. They're like, well, you're teaching us about, this is the gold standard for what to do for anxiety, but the reality of my job is really different. I'm having to do all these other things. And so, yes, like I think right now we're aiming to maybe adapt it a little bit, and that's why we're trying to get the lay of the land and see what else needs to be added, what is missing, and what do they feel like is relevant to their job so that we can help support them.
So what stage are you in right now? Are you just rolling this out?
Yes, we're just rolling this out. So I think the app launched few months ago.
Okay, so it's an app. They're doing it on their phone. That makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. What's the next step after you collect this data and identify what it is, the major things that it's doing? Are you going to do some sort of mapping of their work and then provide suggestions for modifications, or what? Yeah. What happens next?
Yes, exactly, actually. So right now, I think as we're collecting data, we're still going to try and create like reports for each of the complexes in each of the districts, because each probably have some unique differences and unique needs. And so we're making these reports again just to have them even just see like, okay, this is the product of what I'm putting in. This is why it's useful, or how it can be useful. And so right now we're just doing that. We're getting buy-in, and then I think long-term wise, I feel like it, I don't know if we've really thought that deep into it long term, to be very honest. I think ideally we would like to see this turn into some sort of way to just understand statewide what kind of like policies can be implemented. We have like what might supports even look like, and then go from there. I feel like right now we're not even clear of what supports might look like, so we haven't even thought beyond that.
Yeah, you just want to get an appreciation of the issue.
Yeah, and that's kind of my understanding of what's going on right now. Like I'm not leading it in any way, and so take this with a grain of salt, but that's my understanding of kind of where we're at with the project.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you're using this sort of royal we. This is sort of you're a partner in a larger project. Where do you see your own personal research interests, either related to this project or how what you're interested in this reflects what you want to learn about, study, or do more broadly?
That's a great question. So I feel like in the projects I've been involved in the past, I've primarily been helping out with kind of once the partnerships are already settled. Really helping out with just here's something we'd like to know about this initiative. But I've never really been a part of a project from the beginning stages, finding out barriers, and because really my general research interest is like, how can we take things, whatever thing we're trying to implement, and how can we actually optimize it? Because one size doesn't fit all, and how can we actually optimize it? And so I've never been a part of a project where it's kind of in the beginning stages, and I feel like that's adding to my general interest. It's like finding out the barriers from the get-go, and like really, I think a big strength of this project is that it is we're really trying hard to just really kind of use this like community-based participatory research approach, where our community stakeholders are very involved in the questions that we ask. And I think that that's such a strength, and I've never really been a part of that before, and I think just kind of learning from that, if that makes sense, and seeing how to better.
What do you feel like you're learning from your community stakeholders? So far, I know it's just beginning.
I think right now we're learning all of the real world problems that they face. Some like science tries to take such a backseat and really tries to have this like objectivity to things. What I'm learning from them mainly is the real world problems which can even come down to different things like, oh, that's not feasible in this complex or versus this complex, or so I feel like it's just
usually it's we have too much on our plate.
Yes, exactly.
We can't do that because of this and this, and usually they're very good reasons, and researchers usually ignore those reasons unless they're truly being community-based partners.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes we need to listen to that more than we do. Often, as even implementation scientists, I think, who I think really purportedly value this input, will sometimes behind closed doors say that's not really an issue. I hear that sometimes.
I don't know, Mike. I feel like people in the world need to respect our role as scientists. We produce p-values. We get
Sure,
put
if the
stars
p-value
next to them. And, nobody else in the world really knows how to do that. And so I feel like it sort of irritates me to hear people say, "Well, look, my lived experience is different than your science." I don't know. We have science. It comes from on high. Like it's published in journals that nobody reads.
It's true. When you put it in a table, it should be able to be done.
Exactly. I feel like we're done at that point.
Andrea, you mentioned earlier that you were really interested in optimization, and I'm also interested in that. But I'm curious what that means to you when you think about optimizing a practice.
That's a good question. I think, right now I'm still trying to fully figure that out myself. And I think right now what that means to me is just making things really based off of context, and also understanding that I think compromises need to be made sometimes, because optimizing doesn't necessarily mean perfecting. I think is one thing I've been growing to learn, because I think when I started in my career, I was like, we need to find the perfect system that works for this specific context, and I had a different definition of perfection back then too. And but I think optimizing is not necessarily perfecting, and I feel like, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's
my question might not have seemed like a good segue, but it was actually intentional because it's accepting that you need to make compromises, that there usually is no one perfect solution, and that it's oftentimes a trade-off.
Exactly.
I think researchers are always going for what's the most effective thing. Effectiveness is great. We all want effectiveness, but not if it can't actually be done, or not if it comes at a prohibitive cost, or not if it's impossible for people to do because it doesn't fit in with their time window. So maybe we should aim for something that is pretty good and fits within the time window and doesn't overly burden them, rather than the perfect thing that no one will ever do or adopt.
It makes no sense to have something be 80% or 90% effective in some situations, but then half the time or whatever, it's 0% effective because they won't actually do it. It's better to have something that's 50 or 60% effective, like to take that hit. So it's almost like you're thinking about optimizing for different goals, right? You might be optimizing it for efficacy, you might be optimizing for retention, you might be optimizing for engagement, I could see that.
Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about?
Not necessarily. I think just in general, I think one of your previous questions, or potential questions, was where do I see the field kind of headed?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so where do you see the field headed?
So where I see the field heading, and where more of where I'm hoping to see the field head, is more so understanding that with implementation science, it can look a lot of different ways, and that there are a lot of different goals that we're trying to accomplish within that. And because of all those different goals, when we write out in journals, evidence does not necessarily have to look the same, if that makes any sense. And I think where I'm also seeing the field go and hoping it continues this way is, again, really involving community stakeholders, having them actually have a seat at the table, and understanding that compromise is a part of science. And I think that is, that's where I'm seeing it heading, and I'm hoping that it's heading that way, continues to head that way.
Yeah, really thinking that, wanting to see implementation science focus more on pragmatic solutions that are as effective as possible, but that work in different situations and maybe are tailored to those specific situations and settings and contexts in a way that's sort of most effective, but also probably least cost, and focusing on a broad array of outcomes.
Exactly, and understanding that it's going to look different for every project. And I think that is something that science previously, or at least with just randomized control trials, I feel like that's something we've really stuck to, is that a specific treatment.
Generalizability.
Yes, thank you. Generalizability is the best, and it is the goal. And I think we're starting to learn as a field that may not be the case, and that's okay.
I mean, in measurement, this comes up. In fact, we got a little debate on a podcast episode recently because, like, why would I want to use a measure that, even though it's been standardized, it kind of fits my context, but it probably doesn't, and actually is probably totally invalid or not totally, but like less valid, versus inventing a measure that's like a 5-item measure that really fits my context. Who's to say that one is better than the other one? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe you need to run both. Maybe do that test. It's a perfectly good thing to test. But I think the same thing applies here for interventions and implementation strategies. It's like that tailoring. Sometimes there's a lot to be said for face validity around tailoring. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, we don't love that in science.
We don't love that. Exactly. Yeah, we're all about the numbers and everything else.
We have one last question for you, unless you wanted to. You probably had something funny to say.
I wouldn't say it was funny. I was just going to add, and you can feel free to edit this out, that there's even complaints from psychometricians, people who are measurement wizards like Leanna Clark and David Watson, who complain that we will write in a measure section, this measure has previously been, has established reliability and validity, but then not reported from your own sample. And like the point of these practices, you report it every time, even if like other studies, even in similar populations, have shown that measures work. Like it's a continuously evolving process. Validity isn't like done and dusted.
Yeah, a measure isn't valid. The data from a measure is valid. Yes.
Yeah, and so your point about adaptations to context, so I mean, even with an established valid measure, you might find that this item, one particular item, just didn't work in the study you designed. So I think that's an important foundation of what we do.
Yeah. Okay, one last question for you. We're asking everyone. We're doing a little would you rather quiz.
Oh, okay.
So it's just one question, though. So would you rather donate $50 million to charity, or would you rather donate $50 million to science?
Oh.
The difference is the donation to science is not tax deductible.
It's not tax. Okay, I was going to say.
Like big picture science. We all talk about that. Big picture. We'll have to let our podcast know now that actually science is one thing that you can donate.
I thought if you donated to like a university, wouldn't that be tax deductible because it's a nonprofit?
Well, you didn't. You just said donate to science. I just assumed science.
So they're both tax deductible. We need to balance all variables. There's one variable that's changing here.
Which is charity or
science?
Science. Okay. Oh well, my thing is like, what charity? Like, what is the science actually looking at? But I think, I think in an ideal world, I would like to put it towards science, because I think that in an ideal world, science would be the way forward so that we don't need charities. And so to me, I feel like I would rather do that. And so that's in an ideal world, though. So
basically, you want to put charities out of business.
Yeah.
Okay. That's why we don't need it anymore, you know?
Science,
yeah.
I like it.
That is a great response. Because me personally, like I think, I'd rather give it to charity because science is going to blow it away. But
that's why I say in an ideal world.
If I would give it to charity, why am I a scientist? Yeah. This is a very deep question I've been struggling with since I wrote this. Would you rather?
Yeah, the question was really for you rather than it was.
Let's admit it. This whole podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on. Yeah, really appreciate it. It's a super fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
I'm sort of, but not really, on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter at @ISPodcast, and Kevin is at KMKing_psych. Kevin is also on Blue Sky at Kevin M. King. All of the comments and opinions expressed during today's show are our own. They are well-reasoned and insightful, and therefore are probably not endorsed by our grant funders or employers. Thanks for listening. On behalf of Kevin King, we'll catch you next time. back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. Quoth the raven, nevermore.